Good evening, everybody. This is part one of our Meet the Founder series. This evening, I have GageXRP, headquartered out of Arizona. How are you doing tonight, Gage?
Doing well, Aaron. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I'm very excited to get this thing going, getting our YouTube channel up and running, and learn some lessons from you who've been in the financial sector for how long now?
A little over 3 years.
Okay, right on, right on. So going right into that then. So you're in the financial world. Was that the catalyst for you getting into trading, stocks, crypto, or was it something else?
The main catalyst has always been financial freedom, not just for myself, but for my family too. I started strictly with stocks, and then thanks to Eric, gravitated more towards crypto.
Right, right. That's kind of a thing, the financial freedom. So whenever I think of financial freedom, I think of, being able to go do anything anytime without having to ask anybody's permission. Is that kind of the same for you?
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned your family. Were you raised with a financial freedom type mindset, and were you raised oriented towards building additional income sources, or kind of the regular middle class rat race type?
I would say more so the middle class kind of upbringing. So I was kind of raised to work hard, go to college, get a good job eventually. Growing up, I played competitive soccer from an early age. All throughout high school, I eventually ended up playing college soccer in Indiana and San Diego. And the truth is, I didn't even think to build additional income streams until I decided to stop playing soccer.
And what made you stop wanting to play soccer? Or was there injury or just decision?
It was a mix of both. It was a repeating back injury in college soccer, as well as I kind of just had a realization of I had to move on and kind of start my career.
And you said Indiana and then San Diego, correct?
Yes.
Was that were both of those colleges?
Yeah, both of them were D2 schools. The first year I went to Indiana, and then I ended up transferring to San Diego due to the coach actually leaving after the first year.
Did you follow him, or was it just he was done, and so you decided for a fresh start as well?
He was done. He went to a bigger school in Illinois, and I actually hated the cold because I'm from Arizona. So moving to San Diego, closer to my family, and just being in San Diego made a lot more sense to me than sticking around in the Midwest. But it was still a really good perspective, and I'm glad I did it.
Not at all. So out of this, out of this mindset that you've developed and out of your experience, how long have you been trading stocks or in crypto or just trading in general?
It's been about 4 years now.
Okay, so you started trading before you were even doing working financially.
Correct. I started with stocks and then gravitated towards crypto. But I guess I've always had a curiosity about it. And after college, I started working at a bank, and that kind of led me into the wealth management sector.
Right on, right on. So from these last 4 years of trading, could you pinpoint three important lessons that you've carried over from trading into your everyday life, or particular instances where you're like, man, I kind of feel like, we always talk about mental and emotional intelligence and the anguish of watching things just keep going red on you, the dip keeps dipping, things along those lines. So could you highlight three lessons that you've learned for us?
Yeah, three things. Number one, I would say discipline equals freedom. That's a Jocko Willink quote that's kind of carried from trading into real life. Just self-accountability can only help you in trading and investing. And I would say personal finance is more of a behavioral question than anything else. You can separate your needs and your wants, and you really need less than you think, but it's important to want more for yourself and live below your means, but actively be looking to increase your income. Number two, I would say be willing to change and entertain contrary conflicting perspectives, you'll become more educated and open-minded. He who thinks he knows everything knows nothing. And 3, I would say everything has a risk-reward ratio. Whether it's investing or in real life, you should calculate it. Diversification preserves wealth, but concentration builds it.
And when you say everything has a risk-reward ratio, that like also includes opportunity cost, correct?
Exactly.
So looking back at your experience now, what would one question be that you would want every beginner to ask that you at this point?
I guess it would be more along the lines of how to strategically employ capital based on conviction. I think some of my worst trades has led me to that question.
So like dollar cost averaging potentially, or waiting for confirmation, stuff like that?
Exactly. And just really building up the conviction. Like, I would argue my worst trade that I completely lucked out on was Clover Health. And it's kind of funny because I actually remember you and I speaking about it months ago.
Yeah.
And I sadly bought into the Shawmouth bullshit hype and bag held it for some time, but I did get lucky and sell near like $20-ish, but at the end of the day, I had no real plan, and it really was a pure gamble, and I got lucky off of a short squeeze, so it could have easily just never pumped at all.
Right. Yeah, I think at this point it probably is well below what your entry point would have been. Yeah, that's I was wondering if you were going to mention that one, because yeah, I definitely remember us talking about it, and then of course that led into the next question. But what is, so you've already mentioned the worst trade. What is the best trade you've ever made?
I would say my proudest trade was AMC near $2. I actually eyed it as a mean reversion, and I asked Riz and Chris about it in one of the webinars a while back. I ended up selling it near $10, which was still amazing gains, but it was pretty funny because a few weeks after, it ended up turning into the next game stonk and probably had a ride to like $20 or $30.
Yeah. I sold that at 5 or something, sold around 8. Yeah, and I was just like, I'm not gambling that much, I've never had a big account anyway, so I wasn't going to gamble very much. Let's talk about something fun. I know that this is like your we've talked about this before. If you could have the Black Swan event be one thing in particular, what would it be, and how would you capitalize on it? So you get to pick. You get to pick the hypothetical situation.
So if a Black Swan is an event that is deemed improbable and it causes massive consequences, then if it occurs relative to your knowledge or expectation, then I would say the best way to minimize its effects would be to keep an open mind. Mm-hmm. That's why I do think, in my opinion, it does lead to Bitcoin, but human nature is not programmed for Black Swans. So, as Mr. Poole says, expect the unexpected.
Right.
Some Black Swans can come from the slow building up of incremental changes in the same direction, such as technologies that creep up slowly, or think of the growth of NASDAQ stocks in the late 90s that took a few years. But on the contrary, things can also happen very fast. Like, think of earthquakes that last minutes, or 9/11 that lasted hours. Right. So, in general, negative Black Swans happen really quickly, while positive ones take time. So if I had to choose one, of course, I would want it to be more positive. And I think to some degree, we're already capitalizing on it by being early investors in XRP. But if I had to choose, of course, it would be Bitcoin.
Bitcoin to zero, like Dan Pena, or Bitcoin to 500,000, like, everybody's favorite TikTok influencer?
Bitcoin to zero would be pretty fun to watch, although I don't think it'll go that low. I do think it'll eventually have a massive correction.
Yeah, that would be nice, because I do think XRP would definitely benefit from that particular event as well. So we all know about SMART goals, and we watch videos and we things about that. Um, but you specifically, when you're making your goals for the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case might be, do you plan backwards or do you plan forward? So, like for example, do you start with your short term, go to middle term and long term, or do you set your long term goals first and then work backwards from there and get down to your baby steps?
I set my long-term goals first and then work down my baby steps. It's kind of implemented me just from my financial planning experience on fulfilling your long-term bucket as much as you can, then focus on your medium-term bucket, which would be maybe 1 to 3 years out, and then your short-term bucket would come next, which would probably be what you need within the next 0 to 6 months.
Are there any particular, can you give us an example of like a major purchase, how you would plan for a major purchase, such as a house, in Eric's case, maybe a yacht somewhere, what would that kind of look like?
What do you mean exactly?
So, you like, okay, so my goal is to buy a house. What would be the steps that I should take? Buying a house, it's a really large purchase. It has a 30-year mortgage on it, but I can't afford it this year. I can afford it in 5 years. What would be the steps from 5 years back? What would those steps look like?
I guess I would just make sure that not only my operating income could be able to afford that, but my long-term bucket could take that hit or necessarily want to afford that because it's in my tolerance range. I guess I'm more afraid of affecting my long-term bucket than anything else. That's kind of why I keep piling into more long-term investments, and then anything in the short term, I kind of live more on a day-to-day basis.
And you're speaking like investment-wise.
Exactly. Like, I eventually do want to buy a house myself. Right now, I live far below my means, and I have a very fortunate opportunity where I rent from a friend. Mm. So I've been lucky there. So I guess it hasn't been necessarily on my mind as an immediate thought, but I do want to work my steps to get there.
And so then just a couple more questions. What are your core values? Do you have 3? Do you have 5? Do you have any? I mean, I'm sure you do, but.
I would say my main core value is integrity, just kind of doing the right thing when no one is watching. I think that's one of the most important core values. And then the other biggest value, I'd argue, would be my foundational value of playing long-term games with long-term people. I think all returns in life, whether it's wealth, relationships, knowledge, they all come from compound interest. And that's a quote that's stuck with me from Naval Ravikant's book.
How many books have you read just this year? We're only 17 days in, but you post about books, you talk about books. How many books have you already read this year?
Honestly, I'm still skimming through the Black Swan, actually. Mm-hmm. The last few weeks, I've been skimming more through that, but I have about maybe 30 or 40 books on my nightstand that I like to always go back and reference.
So you don't sit there and read every word. You more so skim?
Yeah, after I've read a book, I'll find myself going back to it if a certain thought comes up or I remember a reference. Mm-hmm. Then I really like to reread it. But once I find a book I really like, I kind of get attached to it.
Yeah, I used to read a lot, and I have since after I graduated high school and joined the Marine Corps, where I was playing the wrong game. It definitely lost not my reading ability, that didn't go away, but the ability to sit down and read an entire chapter of a heavy book. It no longer stuck with me. Even today I've gotten better at it, but sitting down sometimes just to read is just quite a chore, and it didn't used to be. It's very interesting how it's like a muscle if you neglected it.
Right, and I think it's so important to find like what you're interested in, and then start reading topics about that. And then the more you do that, the more you're gonna find what you like to read.
Yeah, like because I just find law in with the past summer of 20 going back to the what law maybe should actually look like as opposed to what it currently does look like is very, very interesting. So I've got William Blackstone's his natural law book. So it is very interesting, and as I get better at reading, I'm sure I'll be able to absorb it a little bit more. But for the last question, everybody likes to ask this question, and I'm not a fan of it myself, but I am interested to hear what you have to say about it. If you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I would tell him invest as early and often as possible. Most importantly, invest in yourself. Every dollar you sacrifice can be thought of as sweat equity. Whether you're paying market tuition or paying yourself, it's up to you. Mm-hmm. And become obsessed with learning. Don't look back.
Yep. That's the investing as early as possible is something that is quite literally priceless. I was scrolling through YouTube before I was leaving to go on one of my suggested videos was from 5 years ago. It was a TED talk about Web3, and I was just looking back. I was like, man, 5 years ago, I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I had no idea what cryptocurrency was. I knew the term stocks, but I didn't know what stocks were, how to even go about investing in them, because the people I was around they didn't care to learn, so I didn't care to learn, and it's super, super important. Absolutely priceless. That is my last question, sir. Is there anything you would like to leave with our community?
That is it, man. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, Aaron.
All right, sir.